Let's move forward to another critically important issue, and that is the aftermath of the elections in South Africa. Yesterday, President Cyril Ramaphosa was sworn in for another term of president at the head, this time, of a government of national unity. A lot of different pieces, a lot of different threads to pull on here, and we are very honored to be joined once again by Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, who is the national spokesperson for the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa. Pax, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's wonderful to be on the show again. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you well. We can hear you well. It's wonderful to have you on the show again. I wish we were in slightly better circumstances, but where you are there in South Africa, a new government of sorts has been formed between a number of different parties. And we talked just before the election about the rise of the right wing in South Africa. And I kind of want to start in that context because it feels like some of what you and NUMSA and others were warning about, that the country could move significantly to the right in the upcoming months, seems to be coming true here with this government of national unity. But explain to us, what is this GNU and what does it mean for South Africa?
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It is always a pleasure to be on Breakthrough News. It's always great to engage with you guys. So where we are as a country in South Africa is that, yes, we have had the elections on May 29th, and the governing party, the ANC, which historically was a party of the liberation movement. And I think you and I have had conversations about this in terms of its history, etc., and how it rose to power. The governing party only managed to secure 40% of the vote. So it really has experienced staggering losses in this elections. It is no longer a dominant party. It needed to have a minimum of 50% plus one in order to be considered, the dominant party and to form a government on its own as a bloc. But it has gone below that and now has to haggle with other political parties in order to govern. So yes, it still has quite a significant share. It has 40%. The other party the next party that sort of that performed second in this race was the Democratic Alliance, which is a right-wing organization. It secured 20% of the vote. And then you had the EFF, which secured about 9.5% of the vote, and the MK party, which secured about 11% of the vote. So now the options that were left for the ANC was that the ANC would have, in order for it to secure 50%, it needs to go into a coalition government with one of these political formations that I've just mentioned to you. Now, what it did is instead of going into a coalition with a political formation like the Economic Freedom Fighters or even the MK party, it took a decision to announce what it called a government of national unity, which in our view, as NUMSA, we view this as a way for it to sort of go into a coalition with the right-wing DA without coming out straight and saying, hey guys, we're going into a coalition with the right-wing DA, because it doesn't want to be explicit about saying that, because that would alienate a lot of the alliance partners. As you know, the ANC is a party that has alliances with Labour in the form of COSATU, which is the biggest trade union federation in South Africa, and it has an alliance with the South African Communist Party. Both those two formations made it clear it wouldn't support an alliance of the ANC going to power with the DA. But this GNU that I've just described to you is made up of the DA, the ANC, and another political formation called the IFP. And by the ANC choosing, as I said, not to go into an alliance with a more sort of leftist, leaning parties like the EFF and MK, sends a message to everybody that this ANC is most likely going to be adopting very right-wing policies, because in order for it to actually, get things going in government, it will need the support of the right-wing Democratic Alliance, which has, which is the other party that gained quite a big part of the vote.
Well, that's very, very upsetting to hear. And I'm curious if you can elaborate a bit on what's at stake here. When you talk about this, meaning that the ANC of now will likely be compromising on certain policies, moving to the right on them. What kinds of policies are you referring to here?
So, Rainier, one of the things that we're very worried about, which NUMSA has already outlined, is our very, very deep concern around the fact that um, when you look at the policies of the Democratic Alliance, and the Democratic Alliance, by the way, is very vociferous in pushing its agenda. It doesn't hide what it is and what it represents. In terms of foreign policy, the Democratic Alliance, for example, supports Zionism and supports apartheid Israel. It does not recognize that there is a genocide happening in Gaza. It believes that Israel has the right to defend itself. So already you have a very serious problem from a foreign policy perspective when you look at all the work that the South African government has done in relation to raising the flag of Palestinian people, the battles that it has fought at the ICJ, etc. Secondly, where there is a major contradiction is on the issue of things like the national minimum wage, which is obviously a policy that allows workers in South Africa to earn a minimum wage. The Democratic Alliance is very much opposed to the national minimum wage. It believes in rampant exploitation of labor. The DA does not like South Africa's labor legislations, our labor regulations. It feels that South Africa's labor regulations go too far in protecting worker rights. It would like to see a loosening of labor regulations and a flexible labor market. And I know when you hear these phrases, flexible labor market, you know what it means. It's a dog whistle for rampant exploitation of workers. It means that you pay workers what you want to pay them if you're an owner of a company. You expose them to all manner of shocking conditions. You deny them any basic benefits, all in the name of defending the markets. This is what the DA is about. The Democratic Alliance is also very opposed to policies of redress, policies like affirmative action and employment equity. These are policies that the South African government implemented as a way to sort of make up for the horrible inequalities that apartheid created in the workplace. If you look at, for example, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which represents, all of South African corporations, there is not a single 100% black-owned company in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange 30 years after the end of apartheid. So that tells you a lot about how little transformation has taken place in terms of the owners of the South African economy. So the DA represents the interests of white capital, those who are the billionaire class. And so as a trade union, we are concerned that this GNU is nothing more than a cover for the reactionaries within the ANC to continue to drive and to deepen austerity and to deepen the neoliberal economics.
Well, and on that note, you recently had an op-ed in The Independent that I think spoke to this issue that perhaps we shouldn't give up all hope despite the negative parliamentary matrix, as it were. And you were discussing how workers themselves have a lot of agency to determine what the outcome of the future of South Africa is, workers and workers' organizations. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that as well as we look at sort of a gloomy scenario as it concerns Parliament proper.
Well, yes, I think it is very easy to get depressed. I'll be honest. I was very upset when I was watching the election result. Not so much because of the performance of the ANC. I think the poor performance of the ANC, many of us expected. In fact, NUMSA has been predicting for a long time that the ANC would actually continue to lose massive electoral support because they just simply refused to implement more radical policies that would win over the working class majority. And if they had done so, they could have actually prevented this outcome. So it is unfortunate that the ANC created the conditions for their removal, However, the working class, this is an opportunity in my view. It's an opportunity for the working class to flex its muscle. The working class of South Africa is the one that brought down apartheid. And we should never, ever forget that. And just because we now have a very opportunistic right-wing organization called the Democratic Alliance that is pretty much bullying everyone and trying to impose itself on everyone, doesn't mean that we need to sit back, fold our arms, and tolerate the abuse. We have real agency. We have power. And the power that we have is labor. We have the power, for example, if we're united, to shut down the economy. And I think it's time for labor unions and progressive working class formations to unite around a common agenda, to unite around common demands. By far, the majority of South Africans do not support apartheid Israel. Okay? So that is already something that we can coalesce around. We can coalesce around workers' rights and guaranteeing and securing worker protections. We can coalesce around advancing and even undoing the impact of apartheid. We can coalesce around, basically stopping this neoliberal agenda and really trying to push for a more progressive working class agenda. So really, if it's not just the working class that can lead this, but it does call upon even those formations that are in parliament right now. You have the EFF with its 9.5%. You have the MK party, which has 14%. I was wrong earlier. I said 11%. MK actually secured 14%. These parties can come together with other progressive formations in parliament, working together with Labour to drive a pro-working class agenda. And we don't have to be bullied by the elites in the DA and succumb to their racism and their reactionary ideology. So I do think that this scenario doesn't stop us from pushing back so that we can defend our gains and preserve the progress that we've made in the last 30 years and ensure that going forward we empower the next generation so that this scenario must never ever happen again. We should never allow the defenders of apartheid, to find a voice in this country through the Democratic Alliance and other like-minded organizations after we fought so hard to remove apartheid in the first place.
Mm-hmm. No, well taken points all around. And as always, we really, really appreciate you joining us to help us sort through it all. Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, the national spokesperson for the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, or NUMSA, South Africa's largest union. Thank you so much, as always, for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, guys. And just so you know, some of what I've been discussing, especially around the Democratic Alliance, it's a moving target. As I speak to you now, there seems to be a little bit of disagreement between the DA and the ANC, which some of us are celebrating. So, perhaps in 2 weeks, things might be different. But we really do have a role to play as progressives and as the working class. It's not too late. We don't have to go down this right-wing road. There is still a lot that we can do to pull back against the rise of the right wing in this country.
Right on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.